Okay, we'd like to introduce Jacqueline Breger, our guest speaker for tonight.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Jacqueline.
Thanks, Brian. And I do want to apologize if you hear the dogs barking in the background. As you heard, I love dogs, except when they bark. Anyway, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to learn more about this horrendous disease and what I experienced personally. I have one small disclaimer that obviously what I went through personally is not necessarily what every single person goes through. Every person has experienced this somewhat uniquely, and that's what makes this disease so difficult to endure and so difficult to treat, because it looks like all of us, and I've spoken to many people over the last few weeks, who have experienced COVID-19. We've all had things that are just slightly different. When I first heard about coronavirus, I'm sure most of you, like me, didn't get too alarmed. I mean, we figured it was just another flu epidemic, something like the swine flu, H1N1, which, believe it or not, I got too. So I'm obviously not the most lucky person in the town, but I recovered from. I'm generally pretty even keel and don't get alarmed, don't get caught up with media hype. I sort of tend to approach life as a positive, kind of fatalistic attitude. But my attitude when I heard about corona was, well, it can't be that bad, and if it happens, it happens, and we deal with it, so I wasn't too concerned. My parents, however, were extremely concerned. And they, the more they read or saw on the media, the more concerned they became. But for me, it was just, something that was happening in China, which was the other end of the world, number one. And secondly, I kind of felt the media was over-exaggerating. And I'm sure if you think back to, middle of March, a lot of us thought that was the case. The media were just over-exaggerating this and blowing it bravely out of proportion. But then there were suddenly cases of this virus on cruise ships and through Asia and Europe, and even one in Arizona at ASU. And I started to, get more concerned, and specifically because there was no test, there was no vaccine, there was no cure. So, like all of you, I'm sure, we all started to get concerned. But I wasn't concerned enough to cancel a trip to Milwaukee. It was spring break. I had planned this trip with my kids, and we got on the airplane and off we went. The day we left Phoenix for Milwaukee, coronavirus or COVID-19 was declared a pandemic. We still went ahead. Okay, we went to Milwaukee, and while we were there, the reason for going to Milwaukee, was to visit my brother-in-law and my new little nephew, who actually turned 1 today.
Oh, wow.
But it was while we were in Milwaukee that the whole world began to change. And, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but first China, then Italy were drastically affected. Governor Ducey at the time stated he did not recommend closing the schools. And our kids' school district wasn't going to close. And it was constantly like, are they going to close? Aren't they going to close? What's happening? What's Governor Ducey doing? Then he retracted his statement and said he advises that the schools do close. Scottsdale School District still did not want to close their schools. But the day before we were leaving, or the day we were leaving Milwaukee to come back to Arizona, which was the day before school was supposed to start again, they decided to close the schools for 2 weeks. So as you can imagine, we were completely glued to the news. Flights were being canceled, international flights weren't coming in, schools were closing, but more importantly, people were getting sick and dying at an alarming rate. It was then that I really understood the severity of the situation. My brother-in-law, who is a physician and also the chairman of the American Medical Association, strongly advised that my daughters and I go into quarantine when we got back from Milwaukee. Which seemed crazy because we had spent the entire time in their home, and now we were just going on an airplane. But the flight back was very different to the flight there. There were people in the airports and on the planes with masks. We took Clorox wipes with us. We wiped down the seats. We wiped down the seat belts. We wiped down the tray tables. you know, the entire idea of the COVID virus, of the pandemic, was very front of mind. And actually, my brother-in-law predicted while we were there that 1 million people would be ill by June 1st. Well, if any of you have seen the stats today, over 4 million people are ill. So he was off just a bit. But when he said that to me originally, I was like, never. Really? And now we're over 4 million. I am divorced, and so I did notify my ex-husband that I was going to keep the kids with me for another 2 weeks because of this pandemic and because I wanted them to be in quarantine with me. And he gave me some resistance, because what I realized is he was where I was before I left for Milwaukee. He still was, thinking this was media hype and not as serious as it was. The only thing I did differently from my girls, when we arrived back in Phoenix, I went to the bathroom. That's the only thing. Otherwise, we were in the same airport, same, planes and so on. Also, while in quarantine, I went to the supermarket a few times and I went to the gas station. Now, we also had a couple of visitors come by those, during those 2 weeks. But honestly, we thought they were healthy, and as far as I know, they are. And we did obey the whole social distancing laws. So I can't say. So many people say to me, "Well, where did you get it?" I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. Did I get it when I went to the supermarket and I did my self-checkout and pressed the buttons that other people had pressed all day? Did I get it at the gas station when I took the handle out of for the pump and touched that? I have no idea. Okay. It's not something that you can, see actually attack you. Exactly 2 weeks after getting back from Milwaukee, I began to feel my chest close and I started wheezing. It was mild at first, and a friend of mine who's a physician said, "Oh, you're probably just having a mild asthma attack." Now, I'm not a huge asthmatic. I get asthma very, very seldom, and it's usually, because of something, exercise, a virus, something like that. So that was unusual for me to have it, especially in Arizona. I don't usually get it in Arizona. I get it places where I'm highly allergic. But then the next day, the wheezing was more severe. I started to get back pain, chest pressure, a low-grade temperature. I had no sense of taste or smell. My throat was so sore, and I had this horrible dry cough. I had no appetite. I was completely exhausted. And as I said, the wheezing really continued. It was then that the same friend said to me, "Go get tested." Okay. Now that's easier said than done. Or it was anyway. Okay. At the time, getting tested was almost impossible. I called Mayo Clinic. They told me they don't test. They only test their own patients. Eventually, I called my own PCP. They said they're not testing. I need to go to the county. I mean, it was just like this complete runaround to get tested. Eventually, I found a testing center through Banner, which was a drive-through testing center, and it was an hour away from the house. So they at first didn't want to test me. They said I didn't qualify. I wasn't 65 or over, and I wasn't high risk. Like, this was insane. I told the woman all my symptoms. No, you don't need to be tested. Eventually, I mentioned that I had been traveling, and that's what eventually convinced her to say, "Okay, you qualify to be tested." I drove to the testing center. I had the test where they shoved a cotton swab right up my nose. Felt like they were actually, it was so horrendous. It felt like they were swabbing the front of my brain. And I had to promise that I would be in self-quarantine until I got my results, which was anything from 3 to 7 days. By the end of this whole ordeal, I was so exhausted and still had to drive an hour home, which was really challenging. And once I got home, I crawled into bed, and that's where I stayed for 5 weeks. I didn't move. My results were inconclusive, which didn't really surprise me, because once I got back and I started doing some research, I did find out that the testing in Arizona was really not very effective. Was a remarkably high percentage of false negatives and inconclusive results and so on. And that day, I felt an extraordinarily strong desire to share my story. I don't know what it was, okay? Yes, I believe in God, but I certainly don't believe in divine intervention and spirits and ghosts. But there was some greater power that was kind of forcing me to say, you need to share the story, you need to tell people what you're feeling, you need to help people understand, you know, what this is all about, especially because I myself had been like, oh, it's not a big deal. Generally, I'm pretty private, and especially on Facebook, I'll share things like, you know, my kids' achievements and, you know, life experience, like, you know, fun experiences, but I certainly don't share intimate information on Facebook. But I was driven to write this, you know, this post on Facebook to tell people what I was going through so far. So I started to recount my experience with COVID on a daily, well, as much as I could on a daily basis. I know I skipped a few days. Honestly, the response was beyond overwhelming. Over 600 people reached out to me after that first post, whether they did it through Facebook, Messenger, WhatsApp, text calls, and so on. It was really pretty incredible how the community all just rallied to show support, to show some compassion, to show understanding. It was really phenomenal. I still get pretty emotional thinking about it because it was extremely touching. I do want to read you just excerpts of the first couple of days posts so that you can really understand how I was sharing, you know, and what I was sharing with everybody. So the first day that I posted, which was actually April 1st, was, I'm pretty sure I have COVID-19. So I'm not sure if I should post anything yet, but I can help. But if I can help anyone understand this virus a little better, I feel compelled to do so. I'm not one to share like this, but I want to help as much as I can. And if my story helps anyone feel better or provide answers, it's worth overcoming my shyness and desire for privacy. All weekend, I felt a little off. I felt exhausted and unmotivated to do anything, a little off. Monday, I had a horribly bad headache all day, was extremely fatigued, and not motivated to do much. For those that know me, you know that's not me. A work day means I put in a full day and then some. But about around 2 p.m., I crawled into bed. Monday night, my chest started to close and feel tight. My back ached and I was wheezing horribly. Tuesday morning, I woke up after getting very little sleep and was definitely sick. I was wheezing, chest felt like someone was sitting on it, and my back ached. I was having the sweats where I was literally dripping. I was coughing horribly and still had a bad headache and a horrible sore throat. My body ached all over and all I wanted to do was close my eyes. Day 1, I'm definitely worse. I slept for most of the day. My breathing is labored and intermittently. I involuntarily take large gasps of air. So this is what was happening, is that I would be like, fine, and the next thing I'd be going like this, completely involuntary, which really started to scare me. The wheezing is a little better, but I think that's because it may be deeper in my chest. I'm still having the sweats and the chills. My throat is on fire and my head is aching. My back is super sore. I'm nauseous, not able to eat much. I've been advised to go to the ER, but I'm really trying to avoid it. However, that's probably likely to happen tomorrow, if my breathing, or should I say lack of breathing, gets any worse. So I'm in my bedroom alone. My kids bring me food and other items I ask for via text and leave it outside my door and disappear into their rooms. I was told not to even go near my dogs. I hear them scratching at my door to come on in and see me. I don't let them, which breaks my heart. I don't have the results, but I'm pretty sure I'm positive. I feel isolated and very scared. The worse the symptoms get, the more fearful I become. I'm fighting off the idea of going to the ER because to me that's even more scary, but I'm sure I won't be able to avoid that much longer. Day 2, it's been an incredibly tough day. I only got to sleep around 5:30 because my breathing was so labored and I was really scared. I was nervous to go to sleep and kept gasping for air, gulping, constantly questioning if I should or shouldn't take myself off to the ER. Eventually falling asleep out of pure exhaustion and got a few hours in. It was a tough day, although my breathing was a little easier. I continued to wheeze and cough. My fever started to escalate a bit. my throat burned, and the worst was the headache. I am a chronic migraine sufferer, so I'm very familiar with headaches, but this headache was different. It didn't stay in one place. It moved around my head and my forehead, feeling like some foreign entity was making its way around my head and applying painful pressure to my skull. The pain varied in intensity, and no amount of Tylenol helped to cure it. I felt so bad that I did decide to take myself to the ER. I had to drive myself, even though I was tired and pretty lightheaded. I walked in and had to deal with the paranoid onslaught I received from the frontline staff, alone. One thing about this entire ordeal is that it was extremely isolating. We are forced to deal with every facet alone. Nobody can take you to the ER. Nobody can come and keep you company. Nobody can be there for you, which is very hard on the patient and even harder on your loved ones. I walked into the emergency room, and there was a temporary table erected right at the entrance to the ER waiting room. I was immediately absconded by two medical personnel, one who handed me a mask, asked me to spray my hands with disinfectant and not touch anything. The other took my name and details, writing them herself because she wouldn't even let me touch the pen. Needless to say, I felt like an alien who had just landed from outer space. I was then immediately ushered into room 2, and the nurse covered in gown, gloves, mask, etc. I was then instructed to put on a gown, get on the bed. Suddenly they invaded. It was almost like watching one of those pandemic movies. Medical personnel coming in with blue scrubs covered by disposable yellow gowns, fully masked and gloved, trepidatiously opening this glass door that otherwise remained shut at all times, entering my alien quarters, all trying to be pleasant, but strange smiles definitely escaped, and they wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. So one nurse was trying to start an IV, and I don't have the greatest veins. So needless to say, she tried on the inside of my wrist, an incredibly painful place to start an IV in the first place. The vein collapsed and I was practically crying. It was so painful. Moving to my other arm, she tried on the inside of my elbow. I think she was just so rushed and so panicked that she just wanted to get this done. She went a little bit too deep, okay? And she hit a valve. I literally screamed and cussed. It was so incredibly painful. But at the same time, while this is happening, the other nurse that's in my room is trying to ask me all my questions. What are your symptoms? How are you feeling? Blah, blah, blah. I could not even concentrate on what she was saying. It was impossible. I didn't even know what she was saying to me because I was trying to focus on the pain. And she continued to badger me. She was very nice, very warm, but she wanted to get this information and get the hell out of that room too. So anyway, I finally was able to answer all her questions. Blood was drawn through my very sensitive and tender IV. Next, fearful and anxious medical personnel pushed portable machines started entering. First an EKG, then a chest X-ray, where the radiologist didn't even come into the room. The nurse, who was already inside, was asked to place the board behind my back. Well, this was, if it wasn't sad, it was actually be comical because the nurse couldn't get the board into position, and it kind of reminded me of hanging a picture with your spouse or friend, a little bit up to the left, a little bit down to the right, a little bit over to the, it was crazy. Anyway, and each time someone came into the room or left the room, on went the disposable coat, the gloves, the mask. Now, I'm not disputing that was necessary. It was just from a patient standpoint, it was like you felt like a complete alien and like nobody wanted to be there, okay? Then as soon as they were leaving the room, they would just strip all this off and throw it in the trash before actually leaving the room. So I watched this while coughing, wheezing, my head was pounding, my arm was aching. And there I was hooked up to every monitor: blood pressure, oxygen, heart rate, etc., beeping, activating, calculating, flashing. But my oxygen levels were actually good. And then all of a sudden, just in a flash, everybody was gone. Okay, and I was left connected to those machines. Nobody said anything, just gone. And no blanket, no pillow, just me, the bed, and the machines. And I waited. So eventually the doctor came to the door and he said, "I'll be in a moment." And again, he started with the robe and the gloves and the new mask and so on. And he gave me the good news that I did not have pneumonia. I did not have any concerns about my heart, no stroke indicators. So he recommended I go back home, back into self-quarantine until my symptoms disappear. He didn't give me any meds except the albuterol spray that I was already having and Tylenol. And again, once he left, I was alone. So I crawled out of the bed, I got dressed, and I walked out of my glass cage and nobody even looked at me. No one came to show me out or took any notice of my departure. So I just walked out, past the barricaded medical station, out the automatic doors, past the temporary constructed intake table, out the exit doors into the parking lot, and drove myself home. It was kind of surreal. It felt like stepping off a movie set, I have to be honest. Anyway, I continued to diarize my story for the next 30 days or so, more. I found that people really wanted to know and really needed to know the details. The same reason that I'm doing this presentation is because so many people are just not aware of what someone goes through when they have this. And a lot of people sort of aren't even taking it seriously because they don't know anyone who's had COVID. They're not speaking to anyone. They haven't seen it, because it's all behind. You're in self-quarantine, so people are not sharing. But I found that people were really desperate to know what I was experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And as I said before, the outpouring of support, compassion, was just so incredibly heartwarming. And I just felt that I was obligated. There was something about this that I was obligated to share my fight with what I continually call the invisible monster. There were days that were extremely challenging for me to write those posts. I was just so exhausted and I would sleep for 18, 20 hours a day. But it was important enough to me that I really made an effort to do so. I had to feel that something good was coming out of me enduring all of this. So what this roller coaster ride has taught me, and I refer to it in my posts as a roller coaster because I hate roller coasters, but also because it felt like exactly like a roller coaster. You would be sick, you would get really, really bad, then you'd feel like you're starting to get better, and then the next thing, another episode would hit. You'd really be starting to get better. You would stop wheezing, or I did. I stopped wheezing, I stopped coughing as much, my temperature would go down, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, a few days later, my temperature would spike, I would start coughing again, I'd start wheezing again, my chest would close up, my back would ache, my throat burned every day, all day. It was bizarre. And when people say they lose their sense of taste or smell, to me what happened was it almost felt like there was a mucus film on the top of my palate and over my eyes and in the bottom of my throat that would prohibit me from the food meeting the taste buds, so to speak, or smelling anything. And it also blocked my airways. So it was a very strange sensation. One of the things that people don't realize with this is that you experience a major brain fog. You can't concentrate, or I wasn't able to concentrate. I couldn't focus on anything. In fact, since I've been better, some people have said to me that I said really strange things to them, or I wrote emails to them that were really strange. I have no recollection of doing. So, the brain fog is much more intense than you think it is. Also, after a week or two of being in self-quarantine, feeling as sick as a dog, some depression set in for me. So, that was hard. In fact, after, as I was saying, after a week, my symptoms felt like they were improving. And then, as I said, you go on this roller coaster because suddenly you get sick again. But for me, each episode, which is what I called an episode, would get a little better than the last one. So that was encouraging. I felt like even though I was so sick, I was gonna ultimately beat this monster until week 3. Week 3, I started another episode that was horrible, almost as bad as the beginning, if not as bad as the beginning. My oxygen levels dropped. My pulse rate dropped. And I really could not breathe. I was really battling. And for the first time during this illness, I was really genuinely petrified. I was scared that the beast was winning. Now, as I said from the beginning, I'm not an alarmist. I don't jump to extreme conclusions, but I did feel awful, and I did make a telemedicine appointment with my PCP. He didn't really want to subject me to more testing, to another X-ray. And in his opinion, he felt that I had developed more of a bacterial secondary infection, either bronchitis, but more likely pneumonia. So he prescribed antibiotics and a steroid inhaler, and said that in either case, the antibiotics should help. It took about 4 or 5 days before those antibiotics started to kick in, and I started to feel a little better. But I did have to go on a second course of antibiotics before I was really, getting much better. By day 28, I was feeling a lot better. My symptoms had eased, but also the brain fog started to lift. And it was like waking up from a bad dream. Or it was kind of like I had been thrown into a deep, dark hole and suffered a bit of amnesia, because really there wasn't much that I could remember. But then on day 28, I started feeling better. But then the minute I started feeling better, I sort of jumped up and started cleaning my house and, my room. At least I hadn't left my room yet, but, started doing a few things. Well, of course, on day 29, I had a complete setback. You don't realize, or I didn't realize how much this took out of me and how absolutely wiped out I was. As one of my friends said, it kicked my, yeah. However, I definitely was healing, and I did finally emerge from my bedroom on day 35. As I said, I don't recall much of what happened while I was ill in terms of details of who I texted and emailed and what silly things I said. But I know that I fought, and I know that I fought really hard. I have kids to take care of, I have a business to run. As Brian mentioned, I own my own farmers insurance agency. And during this time, I even tried to read texts that my staff were sending and help advise them on how to deal with different situations. And I just couldn't. Thank God for my staff, because they kept my agency afloat, but I couldn't do any of it. I'm a single mom. I'm dependent on my income. I had to do this, but there was no way. And again, my staff will attest to this, that come rain or shine, sickness or health, I am always there for my clients. So, for me to sort of just check out and say, you guys have to deal with this, is so not like my personality. But it was very, very scary. I was scared I'd lose my business. I was scared that I wouldn't beat this. There were many, many days that I couldn't lift my head off my pillow. And thank goodness for my family and my friends who encouraged me to get up, to walk, to go on my balcony, to do things, because otherwise I just could not lift my head off my pillow. I obviously wasn't able to work. It was extremely frightening being so helpless and so alone, and being so dependent. So the last couple of weeks, I have really just been recovering. I have been functioning at maybe 25% of my norm, which is very frustrating for me. it's definitely taking a hell of a long time for me to get my energy back, my stamina back. I spend an hour or two being mom or doing chores or hopefully trying to do some work, and then I'm exhausted and have to take a nap or lie down for a while. So it is coming back, but very slowly. I have to say, my heart goes out to all those who've suffered, and so many have lost this battle, and many others are left mourning. And to all of those that are COVID-19 survivors, boy, do I understand, and am I proud to be amongst you and to have put up such an amazing fight. To those who've lost loved ones, I can't even imagine, and I'm so sorry. My heart aches for you, and I send prayers out to all. I am so extremely grateful to my friends and family who really suffered alongside with me. And as I said, I wouldn't have done all the things I did and without their encouragement. And definitely their love and support made me fight harder. All I can share with you is that this virus is not a hoax. It's not a joke. Okay, it's really brutal. It's an invisible monster that you definitely do not want to tackle. I'm beyond grateful that I fought this battle and I won, but it is extremely frightening at times. All I can do is things like this, where I share my story, and hopefully I provide enough insight and motivation for all of you, and to go out and tell other people, and to really adhere to, staying at home, to social distancing, to staying safe and staying healthy. And that's what that's my motivation. That's why I'm doing this. And that's why I'd love, even though I know that Arizona is lifting the bans on, restaurants and so on and so forth, it's so important to still social distance. It's ironic, but we had the most cases last week than we've ever had, and we've still lifted all these restrictions. So, that's all I can encourage you to do. And if anyone has any questions, just let me know.